Thank you all for joining today. This is the SkyCatch monthly webinar. My name is Michelle Waite, and we are going to go ahead and get started. This is our August edition of our monthly mining webinar series. We've been doing roundtable discussions with interesting people and thought leaders from around the world on topics like automation, data, safety, the environment, high wall scanning, tailings dam monitoring, and more. Today we have a special topic. We're going to be talking about the M300 RTK drone. As you may be aware, it's a newer drone that has been released. And we're going to get into the details of our field study in a bit. But first, I just want to let everybody know you're on Zoom for a webinar. You're probably familiar, but if you hover over the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A area as well as a chat area. If you have any specific questions throughout the event, feel free to put them in the Q&A and we'll address them as they make sense. If we don't get to them, we will be sure to follow up with you after the event. We have a lot of information to share with you today. We are recording this, so it'll be available on demand after the event that can be shared with your colleagues. So let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce our two panelists today. We're going to be doing this a little bit different than what we've done in the last couple of months. David Chen, who is the SkyCatch Chief Technology Officer, is joining us. And he has done some work with others in the SkyCatch office to test the M300 using both the P1 camera as well as the L1 lidar scanner. And he has some interesting observations and results that he's going to share with you today. We also have Sean Gibson from Tech Resources, who has been kind enough to come back. This is his return to the SkyCatch webinar. He was with us for the initial one where we talked about high wall scanning. Sean works for Tech Resources. He does have an M300, has done maybe a couple of flights, and is going to be kind of the mining surveyor voice today and asking questions and responding to any questions based on input that he might have as well. So I am going to leave it to David to take over from here. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. All over to you, David.
All right, thank you, Michelle. And thanks everyone for joining. And today we're going to be talking about the M300, some quick overview of the systems, our initial thoughts of it, and we're going to be reviewing some data with both the P1 and the L1 sensors. So here's the quick overview of the agenda. We're going to do intro to the whole overall system, the components. We'll talk about how we did the test, where we did it, and how we did setup. Then we'll go over P1, the overview. We'll talk about the workflow and then the results, followed by L1 overview, workflow and results. And we'll talk a little bit about the comparison between photogrammetry data from the P1 and lidar data from the L1, followed by Q&A at the end. All right, so the DJI M300 RTK. So quick overview, it's the latest drone from DJI focused on the enterprise for survey and mapping. It's a much bigger drone than any they've previously released in this series. Compared to the M200, it's significantly bigger, although it still fits really compactly into a case. When you expand the arms that fold in, the first thing you'll notice is how massive these motors are. So the drone is about 3.6 kilograms without batteries and 6.3 kilograms when you have both TD60s installed. You compare that to the P4R, which is only 1.4 kilograms, or the M210 RTK, which is 4.7 kilograms with a sensor on it. Some of the biggest improvements they've made for this is the flight time. Without payload, this thing flies for about 55 minutes, and with a single payload, similar to the P1 or L1, you can get approximately 35 to 40 minutes of flight. So compare that with the Phantom 4 RTK, which only flies for about 30 minutes, or the M210 RTK, which is at 20 to 25 minutes. The other big improvement is the service ceiling. So previously, the P4R was able to fly it up to 6,000 meters above sea level, whereas the M210 RTK can only go as high as 3,000 meters. But the M300, if you're working at high altitudes, if you have mines in the mountains, you can go up to 7,000 meters with the 2195 propellers. So this drone is also a lot more rugged than their previous generation. The overall operating temperature from -20 to 50 Celsius. It's also rated to IP45, which means that it can it will prevent any objects greater than 1 millimeter from getting in, and also water jets from any directions. So there's a great video from DJI that shows it being with this rotating sprayer that's spraying the drone from all angles. So in terms of safety, it has a 360-degree object detection, so sense and avoid, with a range of about 40 meters in front, back, left, right, and 30 meters above and below the drone. So there's 6 pairs of stereo cameras plus infrared range sensors that work together to make sure it doesn't crash into anything. So this is something that is really important. We've actually, while we were testing, we inadvertently tested this feature out, because as it was flying, we noticed that it suddenly stopped mid-flight. When we switched over to the FPV view, we saw that it was stopped right in front of a tree. We had set our altitude about 10 meters too low, and this system prevented it from crashing right into a really tall tree. The ADS-B receiver is now standard in all the enterprise drones. So it'll receive broadcasts from manned aviation, so you know if there's an airplane in the area. Also, one of my favorite features is the strobe that's on top and bottom. It's a super bright strobe. It makes it really easy to see in the sky, even in bright daylight. Also really great if you're flying in civil twilight. As per Part 107, you'll need a bright strobe that can be visible up to 3 statute miles. In terms of system redundancy, it has dual IMU, dual barometer, dual compass, and dual GNSS antennas to maintain heading in case you're flying near structures that might be interfering with the compass. And also it has the ability to fly with a single motor out. So if something happens and you lose a motor, you can still safely land this UAV. So hopefully we'll never have to test that feature out. And on the other features, RTK support, you can use this with DJI's DRTK2 base station. You can connect to that either over Wi-Fi, or it can be directly connected to the drone over OcuSync. It's fully compatible with the Skycatch Edge 1 base station via Wi-Fi, or you can use any other third-party base station if it has N-trip service that you can connect to over Wi-Fi. In terms of PPK support, right now it's only available when you're using DJI Pilot. Support for PPK data logging will be available in an upcoming mobile SDK release. For the Edge 1 support, we will have full support for processing data from the M300 within the Edge 1 in the near future. It's in the late stages of QA now. And we'll also have direct PPK processing support for the M300 as well.
So David, you might have answered the question before I ask it here, but so if you have your own site base station that broadcasts corrections over IP, oh, one sec.
Hey, David, for just
Yeah.
quickly, can you explain for those who are not software developers what MSDK is?
Sure. The MSDK is DJI's mobile SDK. It's what third-party developers who are creating their own mission planners use in order to talk to the DJI drones and issue various commands to do things. So specifically here, the feature is requesting the drone to enable PPK mode and record all of the GNSS rover data so we can run post-processing.
Thank you.
Sean?
I think we can keep going.
Okay, let's continue. Sean, let me know when you your question. So the new M300 is paired with the M300 Smart Controller. It's also a really capable piece of hardware that DJI released. Its operating environment, -20 to 40 degrees Celsius. The range is 15 kilometers FCC or 8 kilometers for the rest of the world. That's way beyond what you can see line of sight. So in most operating conditions, you should have a really great signal no matter where you're flying. The battery life is about 2.5 hours with the internal battery pack. And it also comes with this piece on the bottom, which is an external pack, which will power the radio for a total of 4.5 hours. So in terms of the system, it has a built-in Android tablet, has a really nice screen. So it's a 1080p 5.5-inch high brightness screen. It's about 1,000 candelas per square meter. So compare that to a top of the line iPad today, which is only about 500 candelas per square meter. So it's much brighter. It's a 6-core ARM processor with 4 gigs of memory. So you can run other programs. You can, it's powerful enough to do a lot of things. And one of the best features that I think is that this radio can also be used as an SDK RC. So if you can see this picture here, it's a actually, if you take this piece off, there's mounting holes for a tablet holder. So if you want to use a third-party mission planning app, if you want to use Flight One for high wall scanning, you can attach this thing, put in your own tablet, connect the USB cable, and use it just as the connection to the drone.
David,
Sorry
going
about that.
back to the RTK slide, we had a question from Cameron Baker asking if you're using the Edge 1 for RTK, will that also require internet connection to be able to cast its corrections, assuming setup is over a known point?
So you won't need internet connection to cast it. The Edge 1, the way that it works with the M300 is that the Edge 1 creates its own Wi-Fi access point. So you would connect your smart controller to the Edge 1 via Wi-Fi. And the Edge 1 has an Ntrip service built in, which is streaming that data.
Sorry about that, David. I have a child who's teething right now, so he's a bit of a mixed bag of emotions.
So, no problem.
My question was actually, it's probably really loosely related to some of this stuff here. Is if you have a site base station that's broadcasting corrections over IP, can you connect to the correction source via Wi-Fi and eliminate the need for the setup of the Edge or an RTK base?
Yeah, so if you're on a site that has coverage with Wi-Fi all over, the smart controller is just an Android tablet. You would set that up to connect to your site's Wi-Fi. And if your base station is on the same network and you have an IP address and port for the Ntrip service for the RTK corrections, you can just connect that directly and stream it to your drone.
I think you answered this, but if you don't have those corrections over IP, you can still do a PPK workflow from the base file from that base station, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, when you plan the mission using Pilot, it'll store all of the files, rover data, and the photo metadata that you'll need for PPK.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep. All right, let's continue. So testing methodology. So with all the tests that we've performed with this system, it was done at a couple of sites. The primary is at a rock quarry up in Northern California. The way we had the site set up is we've set up these checkpoints across the site, and they're 12-inch checker tiles that we permanently installed into the ground. And at the center of each tile, we put a mag nail. So it has a small divot. It's perfect for getting your survey pole on top of and getting a repeatable measurement. As for the surveying, we measured 3 control points on the site using a Topcon Hyper-V against TopNet North America. And we did these 3 control point measurements with a long observation to get our accuracies down to about 3 to 5 millimeters horizontally and 5 to 9 millimeters vertically. So once we did that, we used a Trimble SX10, which is a total station. We set that up on the site and positioned it using resection against 2 of the control points. And the 3rd control point we used as the known point for the edge 1. Then with the total station, we surveyed the rest of the checkpoints. So we know that we have really high accuracy on all of the measurements. So for the P1 flights, the primary flights we did at 1 centimeter GSD, which is 80 meters with 80%, 70% overlap. The focus for those flights is on checking the accuracy of the system. We also did some flights to test the overall coverage because this camera is a lot, takes much bigger photos, and this drone flies for longer. We wanted to see what is the capabilities in terms of single battery coverage. For the L1, we flew it at 50 meters with 50% overlap. And for those, we evaluated the accuracy of the output point clouds. And we also looked at the quality of the point cloud as compared to P1 photogrammetry data. For the RTK corrections, we used a edge 1, and that was placed over the 3rd control point that I mentioned earlier with a 2-meter pole. And so the M300 was receiving corrections from the edge 1 throughout the whole test. All right, so now we can dive into the sensors themselves. So the first is the Zenmuse P1. So P1 is the first camera payload that I believe DJI has built specifically for survey and mapping. Previously, they've made a lot of really nice cameras, but most of those were really meant for cinematography. They had really great lens and software for capturing videos. However, they were not ideal for photogrammetry for a variety of reasons. But this one is actually an excellent sensor made for photogrammetry. So the specifics around it: 45 megapixel, 35 millimeter sensor. So this is a massive sensor. It's a full frame sensor, same size as a full frame 35 millimeter camera. The images that it produces are 8192 by 5460 pixels. Compare that to the Phantom 4 RTK, which is 5472 by 3648. The photos come out to be about 15 to 20 megabytes each. What makes this camera so great is that because it's a bigger sensor, the pixels are actually much bigger. So it's a 4.4 micrometer pixel versus Phantom 4's 2.4 micrometer, which means that each pixel, the actual size on the sensors, is more than 3 times as big, which makes it really great in lower light conditions, and it also makes for much sharper images. It also shoots much faster, so it shoots at about around 1.4 frames a second versus the P4R, which is around half a frame a second. What DJI expect this system to achieve is 3 centimeters horizontal and 5 centimeter vertical absolute accuracy. And that's kind of what we're testing to see if it matches. So what you'll get on the SD card output, it will be the photos, the GNSS logs, and photo metadata. So here's a quick comparison of the difference in size between the Phantom 4 RTK photos and the P1. And both of these were shot at the same GSD. You can see that the P1 covers significantly more area on the ground. If we take a closer look of these two photos, these are also at the same GSD. So the Phantom 4 photos on the left, you can see compared to the P1, the details on the top of this porta potty is a lot sharper. You can see the lines on the door and the roof. And also the details in the rocks are much cleaner than what you see here. And also what's clipped out is just the checkpoints. You can see the lines between the black and white parts of the tile are super sharp, whereas the P4R photos, the little bit, you can see these fringes along the edges. So for the accuracy evaluation, these are the flight parameters that we used. So 80% front lap, 70% side overlap, and 1 centimeter GSD at 80 meters. For the Phantom 4 RTK, you would have to fly at 37 meters to match the same GSD. And with the P1, because it shoots much faster, we're able to fly at 10 meters a second versus the 2.9 meters a second for the P4R. We're also using distance-based triggering for the capture. So we know that every photo has the proper front overlap. The flight planning was executed with the DJI Pilot on the smart controller. So Flight 1 support for the M300 will also be out in the near future.
Can I ask a quick question? Sean, are you able to, my question for you, the whole idea of the flight speed and the distance from the ground and the ability to get more space, what does that mean for you as a mining surveyor? Like what value does that bring to you?
Well, I think that the big one is there's some areas that you have, ideally, you're always trying to do something in one flight if you can. I mean, that's not the normal scenario all the time. But areas that you have 2, 3, 4 battery flight missions, if you can cut those down to one, that's huge. So being able to fly at the same or a greater height to be able to get the results that you're looking for, it's a huge win if you can pull that kind of stuff off. So it's actually, I have a question about some of that as well too. Is that if with the distance-based triggering, are you finding like where do you see the biggest benefit in regards to processing output quality because of this?
So with the distance-based triggering, we can guarantee that the front overlap is at the exact right amount. What we've seen previously with other drones that didn't have this was that because sometimes you're flying with a headwind or tailwind, the drone might go faster or slower than normal, thus causing you to capture photos with either more overlap or less overlap. And both of those would have negative impacts to the processing. If you have less overlap than you need, then the data may not be sufficient. If you have more overlap, you're dealing with more photos than you actually need to process, and that will increase your processing time.
Fantastic. Michelle, I hope I answered your question properly, because I can definitely think of a scenario where I have a very tight accuracy and resolution requirements. So being able to increase the flight height and along with the footprint per flight, I think I can cut this down by about 50 to 75% with the specs that you have provided here.
And I guess that can be huge in terms of cost too, because the less time that it takes, the more you can cover. It relates to saving money in the long run.
Oh, 100%. Or just going and doing something else that's backed up on your list.
Yeah, exactly. So we had a couple of questions come in, David.
All right. What were the
Image capture
capture settings? Yeah, so for the majority of these, we set everything to auto and then let the P1 decide. And let's see, the second question is, will the terrain awareness be available for flight 1 using the M300? Answer is yes, we will have the same support for terrain following as we did for the previous rounds in flight 1.
David, I had a question on the processing side of this as well too. So with the increase of camera resolution on the P1, it sounds like less photos are required in comparison to the P4 RTK or the EX1, but the images are much larger. How does this translate in regards to the processing time? And does the processing time decrease if the data has been corrected with RTK during the flight?
That's a good question. What we found is that when you are comparing apples to apples data sets, which means that you're flying the same area at the same GSD, you do end up with a lot less photos with the P1, just because each photo covers so much more area at the same resolution. However, the photos are bigger. So when we are processing, we kind of think about it in terms of how many gigapixels of image data overall that we have to process in our engine. And it turns out that regardless of what camera you're using, if you're processing at the same, if you're capturing at the same settings, the processing is pretty similar. Does that answer your question, Sean?
Totally answered my question. That's perfect. Thank you.
Cool. All right, so let's look at some results. And these are some results from the latest batches of testing that we had. We work very closely with the DJI team around testing this system, and we're providing them with constant feedback. And early in our testing, we noticed that we were not hitting the Z accuracy that was spec'd. Quick answer for Terry. We're using the 35mm lens with the P1. Yeah, so we were noticing that our accuracy was not meeting the 5 centimeters. So we've been going back and forth with them on helping them analyze this, and ultimately what they found was that there was a slight error in their offset from GNSS phase center to the gimbal port, and then from gimbal port to the camera center, which accounted for about 2 centimeters of offset. So after they provided us with a testing firmware for this, we were able to achieve much better accuracy. So that little bit of offset made all the difference. And as you can see here with the reference flight from the Phantom 4 RTK, we get a little over 1 to around 1 centimeter on the horizontal axis and a little over 4 vertically. And for 4 subsequent flights with the M300 and P1, we're getting about 1 centimeter on XY and just over 3 on Z, RMSZ. So that's definitely falling within the DJI specs, and this is really solid results that we are seeing achieved repeatably. All right, so coverage. This is also an important factor. How much area can you cover with a single flight? So for this, this is a quarry that we are testing. We decided to map the entire thing. And because we can only legally fly at 120 meters, that actually ended up being 1.5 centimeter GSD. So the data is actually extremely high resolution, even when we were flying at 120 meters. That also allowed us to fly at 15 meters a second, which is quite fast. So if you compare that to the P4R, for the same GSD, you would only be flying at 55 meters, or you would have to fly as low as 55 meters and only at 4.3 meters a second. If you were to fly the P4R at the max altitude, then you can fly at 9.5 meters a second, but that would mean you're getting 3.3 centimeter GSD. So for this whole area, it was ended up being about 257 acres. So that's 104 hectares, a little over that. The total number of photos was 1699, and we achieved that with one full battery and some additional capture with another battery. The full battery captured about 1004 photos, and that was from 100% to return to home with 20% remaining. So given that we are seeing about per battery coverage of approximately 154 acres. So that's easily 4 to 5 times the coverage of a P4R.
Put that in perspective, that is pretty much the equivalent of doing like 4 or 5 flights of what I would do normally with that kind of capability, and twice the level of resolution. Pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. What I see out of this is, like, even though some drones can fly for example, the P4R can fly about 30 minutes, you also have to take into account the time it takes to fly in and out to change the battery. So the longer you can fly on a single battery, the more overall area you can capture with just one battery. So the longer you can fly, the less work it is, and you have to just monitor it while it's going. All right, so let's talk about the L1. So the L1, I think this is an incredible product. It's really the first of its kind out there that's really a tightly integrated lidar and camera sensor that's on a gimbal. It's built around a LiveOx sensor. I think that's a sister company to DJI. So the sensor can have up to 450 meter detection range and up to 3 separate returns. The ranging accuracy at 100 meters is approximately 3 centimeters. There's 2 scanning patterns. So this sensor doesn't create a repeatable scan patterns. If you're familiar with like the Velodynes or the mechanical lidars that always shoot the same pattern in a circular fashion, this one, it has 2 patterns. One is kind of a circular flower pattern, which is covers 70.4 degrees horizontally and 77.2 degrees vertically, and a repetitive pattern, which is kind of a wide pattern with about 70.4 degrees horizontal and 4.5 degrees vertical coverage. So that's what we typically use for the surveys. It also has 200 hertz IMU, and the DJI spec accuracy for this system is 10 centimeter horizontal and 5 centimeter vertical. So you may notice that the horizontal accuracy is slightly worse than the vertical, or normally for photogrammetry, it's opposite. And I believe this is due to the way that the LiDAR beam is spreading on the ground. It's by the time it hits the ground, the beam is not, it's not a point like from a pixel in a photo, but it's more of a kind of an elongated shape due to the way it's scanning. And that we get a little bit worse accuracy on the horizontal. The L1 also has a RGB camera. It's a 20 megapixel sensor. It's the exact same specs as the camera from the P4 RTK, and this is used for colorizing the point cloud in real time and also for post-processing. In DJI Pilot, there's a really neat feature, which is the real-time preview. So as you're flying and capturing, you are getting a full 3D preview of the point cloud as it's being captured. So this is great to see the data as you're flying. You can make sure there's no gaps, you're covering everything you need. And you can actually rotate that view all around to kind of make sure it's good. So what's saved on the SD card is going to be point cloud data, IMU data, photos, GNSS logs, and it contains both rover and base data and some calibration files. So for the L1, the missions are planned with DJI Pilot. So there's a couple of things that you have to do. There's a calibration step that has to be enabled in your missions. We use the recommended 50-meter altitude with 50% side overlap, and we chose a speed of 5 meters a second with dual returns. So the M300 has to have a RTK fix for the L1 to initialize. And there's once you get everything set up, there's about a 5-minute warm-up time for the sensor to do some self-calibration. So yeah, go ahead, Sean.
David, if are you able to fly like a manual mission to capture an area that's fairly tight or from a close proximity, or where you don't have a lot of room and running a grid may not be the effective way to do it?
Yeah, definitely. So you can do either a pre-planned survey mission like in a lawnmower pattern, or you can just fly it normally, and you can use the L1 sensor just like a video camera mode. So essentially you just hit record and it starts recording 3D data, and you can fly this thing and tilt the gimbal, point it at whatever you want. However, the one thing you got to remember is that when you record, you must record the calibration pattern at the beginning and the end of your manual flight. So what that is you have to go to a place that is pretty open. I would say maybe like 50 meters on all sides, and there's a button on the screen that says calibration, and it'll fly the drone in this big figure-8 pattern for maybe 30 seconds, and that helps it calibrate the IMU. So for manual flights, you would take it up somewhere open, run that calibration step, and then go fly whatever you need to, and at the end, do another calibration.
Scenarios for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So here's a quick view of the L1 live point cloud preview. So as it's flying, you can see the points that it's capturing below. And this is another view which is showing it in the full color. So the post-processing for L1 data is done in Terra. And what's great is that it's extremely fast. These data sets took only a couple minutes to process. You just drop in the folder off the L1 SD card, and there is an additional option that you can enable if you have the pro version of Terra, which is I think it's called enhanced accuracy, and I think it does some post-processing, maybe doing some alignment between the lidar and also the photos to improve the accuracy. So this is the point cloud that we got out of our 50-meter flight over the area. Overall, it looks really good. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into this. So I have a question from Angus. Has this been used in underground operations or inaccessible open void inspections? That's a good question. I'm not sure, because I know that for the L1 to initialize, it has to, you have to have a RTK fix. So, and I'm not sure if throughout the flight you need a fix or not. So I'm sure that if you, for underground operations, this might not be usable. All right. So let's look at some evaluations on the point cloud. The capture was done in less than 15 minutes and the processing was less than 5. So overall, the time from setting up the drone, warming up the sensors, capture and processing would total about 40 minutes. And what we got out of that was a point cloud with 96 million points. And the spacing between the points was anywhere from a few millimeters to 3-ish centimeters. And you can see that on the right. This is just a sample from Cloud Compare. In terms of accuracy, we check the Z accuracy at all of our checkpoints, and all of them were quite good. I think checkpoint 2 is an outlier. I think there was actually something set up on it, which is why it's showing a 1 meter error, but everything else is around 5 or less, which falls in line with their spec. Let's see, there's a question coming in. The flight area per battery must be significantly reduced if the flight altitude is 50 meters. Have you tested it? Yeah, so you're right. We focus on 50 meters because we wanted to use what DJI recommended for the best accuracy. I believe on the L1 spec, they said if you're flying at max altitude, you can cover 2 square kilometers with the L1 sensor. But I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure that won't be at the 5-10 centimeter accuracy. So here's an area, you can kind of clearly see trucks, some rocks, and these pipes. The first thing I noticed out of the data was that, is that these rocks are not as sharp as what you would see from photogrammetry output, and it looks a little bit noisy. So this is an interesting thing that I was really interested in, because you can get multiple returns. One of the benefits of the L1 is that you would be able to get some data of the terrain below vegetation. And this is kind of a cross section of a treed area that I captured. And on the left, this is the point cloud filtered to only the single return, and on the right is the exact same area with both returns. And you can clearly see that the ground underneath the tree, you're able to see that, and some over here as well, some terrain under these low brushes. Also in another area, there were some power lines, and these power lines came in really sharp and clear. You can see exactly where they are. So that was really nice. However, when you look at some other areas where there's a lot of small details, looks like this is a pile of rocks. I mean, it starts to look a little bit fuzzy. It just looks kind of like there's a lot of noise, and the actual geometry is a little bit smoothed out. For some use cases, this might not be a problem at all. But for example, for high wall mapping, where you're looking for really sharp details and clear visuals of the wall, I'm not sure if this data is going to cut it. So we also looked at the surface that it generated. On the bottom here, this is just a cross section of the flat dirt ground. You can see the points came in within a range of about 5 centimeters. So that's kind of the noise on a flat surface. And on a more reflective surface, for example, this car here, this is the hood of the car. The surface came in with around 2.5 centimeters of variation. So now we did some comparisons of the same area captured with the L1 and the P1. You can immediately see the difference in terms of sharpness and details. On the left, there's that truck and the rocks. And if you look at the data coming out of the P1, you can see the rocks and its kind of sharp features are very defined. And so are the sharp edges on the trucks. This truck looks a little bit noisy, and all these rocks look kind of rounded. Same with this hilly area. So all the small rocks and details are kind of muddy, whereas the P1 data, you can clearly see where they all are. Let's see. Oh, okay, we have a question. What software is being used to process the P1? So the P1 data, we process it with both Skycatch Projector and also Pix4D. All right, so now where the L1 is really shines is on these sparse structures, man-made objects. So there's a small walkway, and this was a metal lattice structure. So from the L1, you can you clearly see the structure, whereas the P1, this is just something that photogrammetry is not that great at. It didn't reconstruct a lot of it, and everything else looked a lot more noisy. And this was the electrical poles. From the L1, you can see the power lines very clearly. From photogrammetry in P1, those power lines were not reconstructed at all. All right, so
we have another question, David. What is the point cloud density between P1 and L1?
Yeah, so that's gonna be really based on your capture and processing settings. So for the L1, what will affect your point cloud density is two factors. One is your flight altitude, and that's going to determine kind of how much that laser is spread on the ground. And two is your flight speed, because you can imagine that this sensor is generating, I think, about 240,000 points per second. So as you're moving, it's accumulating that many points every second. So if you move through a space faster, then you'll have less points. And for photogrammetry, it's going to be the same. What altitude you flew at will determine the resolution of the photos, and also as you're processing, how dense you want to actually generate the dense point cloud. That's another setting. So you're trading off processing time if you want more details. And a question from Adnan, was that nadir or oblique flight on the walkway? So I think you're referring to this one. This is a completely nadir flight. Yeah, so there wasn't any oblique data. So that might improve the photogrammetry output.
I think you've pretty much answered some questions I was going to ask, but I would say, would it be accurate to say that both the P1 and the L1 have jobs that they're better suited for? So realistically, it's potentially good to have, one of each sensor if you do have those types of needs. And then the other one I think that you pretty much answered was, like, would you say that the high wall mapping workflows are more suited for something with the P1?
Yeah, absolutely. For high wall mapping, where you want really sharp details and clear visual representation of the walls, the P1s definitely will be our go-to camera for it. For the L1, I could see the benefits of it being much faster time to data. You can fly this thing over any size area, and once you're done, you can process and have that point cloud ready in a couple of minutes. So that's a big improvement over photogrammetry, where it's going to be multiple hours before you can see that point cloud. For a lot of areas, if you just need a quick terrain model, that might be the fastest route. And if you're only looking for the geometry and not visually sharp data, L1 will get the job done quicker. Also, I think as they improve the software for the L1 and the firmware as well, we've seen this before from DJI where, you know, the sensor wasn't performing as well when they first released it, but within a few generations of the firmware, they will have made improvements that drastically improve the quality of the outputs.
Definitely see a very good use case too for the L1 when you get into kind of winter months, or at least what we experience up in Canada, where your daylight hours are significantly decreased. So photogrammetry tends to have gaps and issues with low light, where a lidar sensor wouldn't be experiencing that stuff at all, and potentially increases the range of times that you'll be able to fly in during the day in the darker months.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we have a question. David, have you compared yet a high wall outputted 3D mesh after a vertical survey flight outputted from the L1 against the P1 or the or the P4 cam? We haven't done a direct comparison yet. However, just based on the output that we're seeing, if you're looking for geometry, and I would say if you're looking for something within 5 to 10 centimeter accuracy, then I think the L1 can do the job. If you're capturing high wall data for geological analysis, then I think that using the P1 or the P4R, you would still get a much more detailed model of the wall. And also for the L1, I haven't tried generating a 3D mesh from the output yet. That wasn't a part of the standard workflow. So that would have to be something that we generate from the point cloud after the fact. Right. I think that's the end of the presentation. So if there's any other questions I can answer.
Looks like we had another one come in for data
okay.
processing. Does this need to be done in Terra, or can raw data be exported to other software?
For the L1, I think right now Terra is the only software that can process it. I'm not sure if that would be opened up to other softwares yet.
Awesome. Thank you, David. That was really good, detailed information, and I think we'll continue to keep learning. We're very excited about the M300 and its capabilities. Sean, I know you got your M300 not too long ago. Do you have any comments about what you're excited about getting out there and testing it on, or specific use cases that you're going to be getting out there and surveying?
I think, you know, it's just across the board a really juiced up airframe that can do quite a bit more on the safety side. It checks a lot of boxes, and it's just, I think it's going to be a solid platform to do a lot of different things. You know, the sensor capability is second to none. But you know, having SkyCache's processing systems and engineers on board as well too, to be able to integrate this into their systems and cloud platform, I think is also going to take it the rest of the way. So I'm very excited about it.
Nice. David, I'm going to have a couple more questions here. Do you want to take those before we have to shut down here?
Yep. How does PC from Terra go to high wall mapping? PC, I'm assuming, is point cloud. So for high wall mapping with the P1, it would not be using Terra. So for P1, the processing can still be done with SkyCache SVE for high wall mapping. It's just the L1 sensor data that can only be processed with Terra today. So the high wall mapping workflow will still be the exact same as the Explorer one. Let's see, the second question is, where do you think the improvements of the L1 output will come from? IMU, camera sensor size, software, other variables? I think the noise from the output point cloud is coming from the inability for it to precisely position where the sensor's origins are. So that's why there's always a little bit of noise, because if you're off by a tiny bit, then those resulting points are going to be shifted a lot on the ground. I think on the software side, they can improve the algorithms either in Terra or elsewhere on the alignment between each scan to produce a sharper point cloud overall. In terms of the hardware of the sensor, I'm not sure there's much to improve there. Maybe the next version will have a better lidar. I have a question from Brendan. Are the highest returns from the L1 easily deleted to form the lowest point DSM in Terra? Yes, it is. So the LAS file outputted from Terra has a scalar field that indicates the return. So you can filter either the first return or the second return.
Okay, I think we're coming up on the hour and we're just about running out of time. So if there are any additional questions, feel free to send those over to our mining team, mining@skycatch.com, and we will get those answered. Thank you for participating, David and Sean. Thanks for all the great insight and input. And we will be recording this and sending this out after the event. So again, thanks for everybody being here.
Cheers.
All right, thank you.